In this series of videos, we're going to be taking a look at Excel 2013 Unit D, in which we're going to be working with charts. After watching this series of videos, you should be able to complete the following task. First of all, you should be able to plan a chart. Second, create a chart. Then next, move and resize the chart. Change the chart design. Change the chart format. Format a chart. Annotate and draw on a chart. And create a pie chart. Now, before you create a chart, you need to plan the information you want your chart to show and how you want it to look. Planning ahead helps you to decide what type of chart to create and how to organize the data. And of course, understanding the different parts of a chart makes it easier to format and to change specific elements so that the chart best illustrates your data. Now, of course, when you're planning your chart, you want to use a set of guidelines for helping you plan. Now, one of the first things you want to do is you want to determine the purpose of the chart, and as well as to identify the data relationships you want to communicate graphically. So you want to ultimately say, what am I trying to do with this chart? Am I trying to show a part of a whole? Am I trying to show trends over time? Or am I just showing values? You have to really determine out, what am I trying to do? Now, after you do that, you have to identify that data relationship you want to communicate graphically. How do I want to compare things to other things on there? So those are the couple things that you have to do. Is like, well, I want to take this data here and I want to present it this way. Once you have that, then you need to determine the results you want to see on there, and then decide which chart type is the most important, because different chart types display data in distinctive ways. Because, for an example, a pie chart compares parts to the whole, so it's useful for showing what proportion of a budget amount was spent on, maybe for an example, tours in one country relative to what was spent on tours in other countries. Now, a line chart, in contrast, is best for showing trends over time. And to choose the best chart type for your data, you should first decide how you want your data to be displayed and interpreted on there. Now, of course, we'll take a look at a table here in just a few moments that's going to describe some different types of charts that we can create in Excel on there, and the buttons that you can click on the Insert tab to insert those on there. So we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. Now, after you determine the results you want to see and which chart type is the most appropriate, then you want to go through and identify the worksheet data you want the chart to illustrate. Because sometimes you use all the data in the worksheet to create a chart, while at other times you may need to select a range within the sheet on there. So you have to really go through there and pick and choose what you're actually wanting to show, because you can't just throw all the information into a chart, because it's not going to give you the results that you're looking for. Now, finally, one of the other guidelines you need to do is you need to understand the elements of a chart. And of course, we're going to be taking a look at a chart example here in a moment that's going to contain some of the basic elements in a chart that's on there. And of course, a few of the main elements that we're going to be taking a look at here is, first of all, the horizontal axis, which is also called the x-axis on there. And generally we call this the category axis, because generally those are going to be the different categories or the different groups that we have on there, because it's going to contain the names of data groups, maybe such as locations, months, or years. And so that horizontal axis that runs across the bottom of our chart is called the x-axis, and that's why we call it the category axis as well. The vertical axis on there is what we call the y-axis, and it's also called the value axis on there. And the reason we call it the value axis is because it often contains numerical values that help you to interpret the size of the chart elements on there. So we can kind of take a look and judge how large some of this information is, because generally it's going to be represented by a data point or something out there, and without having a value on it, it's hard to really tell what that point or what that bar really means. Now, of course, if you are using a 3D chart, because Excel does have some 3D charts, they also contain a z-axis, and really that's used for comparing data across both categories and values as well. Now, when we take a look as well, the area inside of the horizontal and vertical axis on there, and that's what we call the plot area, and that's where all of our information is going to be at, and that's where what's going to be visually displayed from our Excel spreadsheet that's on there. All of our data is going to be visually displayed in this plot area as well. Now, of course, the tick marks, which are really going to be located on the vertical axis on most cases, and the grid lines, which really extend across the plot area, create a scale of measure for each value. And that allows us to easily track across the plot area, so that something that's on the far right hand side of the chart, we can actually match it up with the left hand value area, so we can identify how much that value is. Now, of course, also it does include a legend, which makes it easy to identify each data series, and we'll talk about the data series and everything else like that here in just a moment. Because usually it's color-coded so that it's very easy to identify, because a legend, much like on a map, kind of explains to you what's going on and how to identify everything. Now, each value in a cell that you select for your chart is what we call a data point. And of course, in a chart as well, a data marker visually represents each data point, which in this case we're going to be looking at is a column on there, or a column chart in just a moment here. Now, of course, a collection of related data points is what we call a data series that's on there. And so if we take a look at this next slide here, this shows you all the different chart elements. So first of all, if we take a look at the lines going all the way across, those are our grid lines, and that kind of helps us to identify that we know if it reaches this top line, that's for 9,000, this line's for 8,000, and so forth. On there, it kind of allows us to identify where that information's at. Now, in addition on to the vertical axis over here, we also have our tick marks. So, and you can actually adjust those as well to make more tick marks or less tick marks according to your preferences on there. And of course, here's our vertical axis, which we can, once again, we can call that our value axis, because here's our different values. And of course, we can see that's our expenses in dollars, so that we know that's $9,000 and so forth on there. Now, of course, each of these different colors on here is what we call a data marker. And of course, that's represents a data point. So somewhere in our chart, each of these is going to be an individual cell. So for this right here, that's going to be for the Australia fourth quarter, and that gives us a value right there. So each cell in Excel is going to give us a specific data marker on here. And when we incorporate several data markers together, that's when we come up with a data series. So this would be like the data series for Britain on there. And then of course across the bottom here, that's our horizontal axis, and of course remember we call that our category axis, because in this case our categories are all going to be the different countries. And of course, this whole entire area right here, this is our plot area, and that's where all of our data is located at graphically. And finally on here we have our legend. And of course our legend, once again, I said, is color coded, and so that we can easily see that any of the blue data markers here, we know that those are tied into quarter one, so those are quarter one information. And of course our reds are quarter two, and so forth on there. And of course this just is, like I said, just a way to graphically display your information so that it's easily interpreted by others. This is the chart I was telling you about a little bit earlier, about some of the different type of chart types that you can use with Excel. Of course, one of the first ones, in which we were just taking a look at, is a column chart. And of course that compares data using columns, and which is ultimately the Excel default. A lot of times they may refer to it as a bar chart in some other spreadsheet programs. So if you see someone say a bar chart, they may call this a vertical bar chart, or they may just call it a column chart that's on there. And of course that's where we have the bars that run straight up and down. We briefly mentioned line charts on there as well, which compare trends over time intervals. And it really looks similar to an area chart, which we see that's down here, and it talks about that. But it doesn't really emphasize the total, so we see just trends over time. You know, from month to month, or day to day, or week to week, we can see that are we going up or down, and that's ultimately what a line chart's showing us. Of course, pie charts, we mentioned those as well, and of course that compares sizes of a piece to the as a part of a whole, and it's used for a single series of numbers. on there. So as we've seen on the data series, which was on our previous slide, for like the quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, that would help us make a pie chart, but we couldn't use all that information for a pie chart on there. Of course, our bar chart is here, and some people may call this a horizontal bar chart because it does use horizontal bars. And of course, we have our area chart here as well, which shows individual volume changes over time in relation to total volume. And then finally, we have a scatter chart here as well, which ultimately just compares trends over an uneven time or measurement intervals. And primarily that's used in scientific and engineering disciplines to spot trends and for exploration on there as well. And that concludes the information that is on pages Excel 80 and 81. If you go to Course Sites now, you need to go to the content area and download the file for the walkthrough, and that's the EXD1 file. That way, so when you go to page Excel 82, we can go ahead and open up that file so that we can create a chart. So you are ready to move on to the next video.